Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to Warno. Hello again there, friends and fans. Raptor here, and welcome to this upcoming and/or probably out now RTS game that's in early access on Steam about the Cold War. This game, including Broken Arrow and Regiments and even Men of War Assault Squad 2 and even Company Heroes 3 have got me excited. I shouldn't say Men of War Assault Squad 2, I mean Men of War 2. Holy crap, that's going to be confusing to remember. But anyway, hey, good to see you all here for this wonderful overview of the armory system in the game. If you're a new player to this, if you've not played Steel Division 2, or any of the War Games series from before, this may all be new to you, and you're thinking about getting into this game, or maybe you're into it now, and you're feeling a little uncomfortable or a little uneasy on how to create a deck. And I honestly think that in this game, and in Steel Division, it's easier than ever before. In the previous games, it was always a challenge on which units you wanted to bring into battle and trying to pick a specialization, whether or not you wanted to have helicopters or infantry or tanks, and it can be quite overwhelming and also quite exciting, too, to experiment with, infantry-only battles or massive amounts of air support. And in this game, you'll be choosing a division historically accurate to the period of 1989 in and around Germany and or Warsaw NATO Pact, specifically a battle for Germany, what they would have used in the defense of Germany or the invasion of West Germany, both East Germany and Pact forces coming across the border. And so if you think about it, if you're familiar with these weapons and technology, or if you're not, then this will definitely be helpful for you. Well, let's jump into the armory now, and we're going to take a look at try to make a deck that's going to be useful for all of you. Now, keep in mind that this game right now, the version that I'm playing, is pre-early access release. So even now, things will be changing constantly in this game. So all the units that we show you today and all their stats and stuff are going to constantly be changing. So don't base anything on what you see on this screen in terms of statistics or costs or anything like that. This is all subject to change at any time, and hopefully gets better with a lot of our feedback to the developers, which is huge in systems. Again, if you remember Wargame, this is from the same people as Steel Division, so there's going to be a lot of similarities. But anyway, so the most important thing in this game is to know all the things on the left side in terms of what these three letters mean for each of these different tabs. You have Log, Inf, Art, Tink, Rec, AA, Hell, and Air. Now, if you're a little bit of an experienced RTS player, you'll probably be able to figure out some of these, like tank and recon and helicopters and anti-aircraft. But one thing that's special to this game, as it was in Wargame and also Steel Division and some other games, is capturing positions and using logistics vehicles. That's what LOG stands for. And so to start out very basically, we have a Soviet unit here, the BMP-1K3, that's capable of capturing the zones that are present on the map, and those will provide you with reinforcements or the main objective for that game mode in order to capture it, in order to win, basically. And that's where your reinforcements will come from, too. So these units capture those zones and are able to bring in reinforcements from off-map. Pretty helpful. There's even units that can capture it that are airborne. There's tanks, there's armored personnel carriers, and even in the infantry tab, you'll be able to find a few units, too, that can actually capture and hide within buildings, which makes them pretty powerful. For example, the Sapper Commando here, or the Sapper Command, or whatever it may be. These units here can go inside of buildings and can be a little bit more stealthy. They can hide in a forest. So obviously it's a lot easier to hide a few people than it is to hide a giant helicopter. Though the benefit of the helicopter is it's faster, so you'll be able to take more positions of the map. So today's purpose of the tutorial for our armory/deck building is to basically just go over what a lot of these things on the left side mean. It's going to be a little boring, and for those of you who are pros or who are watching or maybe you're newer or whatnot, be sure to ask questions down below in the comment section. Don't be afraid. And don't be afraid to cover anything that I may have missed or got wrong, or go into greater detail on anything that you find to be important in Warno. So at the top here, at the very, very top, we have the alliances between NATO and the Warsaw Pact, and those have a little historical value to them of what nations are in each of those factions, or in this case, alliances. But the difference here in Warno is that these will be the factions that would primarily have fought over West Germany. So there may be some units that we might not see for a while, such as, let's say, Canadian forces that might not be there, or let's say maybe British forces that might not be in the game for some time, but they could definitely show up in the future. So if there's a lot missing, there's a lot more to come in the game, and I'm sure someone will go into detail on more about what nations will come along soon. So, anyway, one of the most important things then is that logistical tab for your command vehicles, and so they need to capture those positions. The next thing to know is that your units will also need supply, so being brought in off map is not only your new units, but also supply to resupply, repair, or refuel them. If your vehicles become damaged in battle, let's say, for example, your truck here has been shot at by some troops and it's damaged, it may travel slower and it may consume more fuel or whatnot. That would be in real life, and so you'd need to be able to repair it. So in order to repair that, you can bring in any sort of supply unit in the game. So in this case, it would be like, for example, this Hemet here, which is a six-wheeled vehicle. Actually, 8-wheeled vehicle. 4x4. No, 8x8. Well, 4 on either side. That, of course, use a massive amount of power to bring supply to the front lines. So this is a very good, capable off-road unit. And on the right side, you might be able to see its statistics, like, for example, what its speed and what its range is. So when it's on the road, it can do 108 kilometers per hour. And that's pretty fast. This will be able to bring supply from the forward operating base, which is somewhere off map, to your troops. So whether you're playing as the Warsaw Pact or whether you're playing as NATO, this vehicle or this vehicle, any of these vehicles can be used to transport supply. And so thus that is where your troops who may be injured or wounded or killed can be replenished with reinforcements, ammunition, fuel, and repairs. Very good thing to note for sure. And there's a lot of different bonuses between having a wheeled vehicle and a tracked vehicle. Of course, one is better on-road than off-road, but also the tracked vehicles may be better capable of defending themselves, such as the BMP with the gun and the ATGM on the top of it. An anti-tank guided missile, which it could use to defend itself against maybe a troop transport that tries to approach it, either with its machine gun, main gun, or the ATGM. The next tab to consider is infantry, and infantry is a lot of big business. For the Americans and for the Soviets, man, there's a lot of stuff that can happen with these infantry units. Of course, they all have rifles, machine guns, anti-tank capabilities. It all depends. In this case, it shows everybody with an assault rifle, and so the engineers team here, just like we showed you before, is a logistics team or a command team that can then command itself into a building. It can capture and command from a building, and it'll be a little bit more affordable than, for example, a helicopter. Only 110 points. These units may also come with a vehicle, although I'm not able to confirm that at the moment, but most infantry, when it deploys in this game, should have a vehicle, or at least they all should. So if you call in, for example, a flash team, they're only 25 points. That's where the command group is much more, because they'll actually make the money for your group. You have to keep in mind all these different things, such as their main weapon, secondary weapon, and the special weapon, which kind of sets them apart. So in this case, it's a grenade, a satchel charge, if you will, in the grenade slot. And since these are engineers, they get something that most units don't. So in this case, they can actually destroy enemy vehicles from close up, or a convoy or a helicopter that's parked refueling, and they can throw a demolition charge at it and destroy it. So that makes them very useful and very valuable. Now, there's also other types of infantry here, such as mechanized infantry, which do come in that BMP that we showed you a little bit earlier. As you see here, it says BMP in parentheses, so that's the type of unit that will transport these guys into battle. And there's also different types of BMPs, too. A BMP-1, a BMP-2, or, for example, with the Americans, a difference between the M113, which is kind of the more squared APC that you see from the Vietnam era, versus the Bradley, which you may recognize from the Gulf War and on into the future. Different types of squads with different types of weapons, all sorts of things to consider. That some of these have anti-tank guided missiles, their penetration values, their distance in which they can engage and fire at an enemy unit, and also their detectability as well. How easily they can be detected by enemy units or enemy recon if they get close to them. Another good thing to note in this game is that there's also the ability to transport troops via helicopter. So the troops that you see here that are known as Arrow rifles are capable of jumping into a Black Hawk helicopter and landing somewhere on the battlefield and then entering buildings and structures and flanking the enemy, and this could be really good for flanking enemy positions somewhere deep behind enemy lines. A lot of great detail here on the troops as well. One of the biggest complaints I've seen from people so far is that they believe the infantry move too fast, which in the case of Warno, the maps are rather large, so the faster the movement, the better. It does look a little strange, but definitely these units have a maximum speed on foot, which you can see as they have our optics and stealth here. And I think all units are set to the same speed. I thought it would say just normal or something along that line under the vehicle or platoon characteristics. But in any case, the Arrow rifles are good stealth, as were the sappers are good stealth, and there's units that might be better based on their experience. A lot of these are probably set to good. There won't be much difference unless we get into let's say, Navy SEALs, for example, or some sort of commando unit, or NKVD, or more like a GRU type forces. That might be better for Recon, that type of thing. Additionally, in the Infantry tab, very strangely, is a new thing that we've noticed during the live stream, that vehicles currently are put into this tab as well. And so if you want to call in an individual unit, for example, this M151A2 Mutt, this could be a good unit to block a bridge for infantry or something like that. This might be good to place near your command unit as a sacrifice, for example. 25 points, a little spendy, but if you were to put it somewhere near your command unit and it was destroyed, you'd kind of know that the enemy was nearby and you'd be able to move it. So having vehicles like this nearby, such as, for example, this UAZ comes with a grenade launcher, that's a little bit more devastating against special forces, which may be trying to flank behind you. It's also good to protect a helicopter landing zone for a resupply if you were able to call them out, that type of thing. So just keep in mind all the weapons here. You may need to know a little bit of prior knowledge as to what the AK-74 is, or the PKM, the differences between an assault rifle and a medium machine gun or grenade. And there's lots of great details here. If you hover over everything in the menu, it's very helpful for seeing that. And if you want to try to make a decision between which unit to get, for example, here with the Motor Strelicky BMP, you can click this pin in the upper right corner, and then you can compare it directly against another unit and see how they compare. Like, for example, what's the difference between the Metis and the BMP units? For example, their rate of fire, the differences between the ATGM versus the RPG, the range difference. But you can see that primarily the assault rifle and light support weapons are almost identical, although the unit quality for the Motor Strelicky BMP is mediocre due to the fact that they probably have a much larger transport and or possibly is slower, that type of thing. Also, the size of the unit is important as well, as I believe the Metis unit is only 2. Let's see if that's the case. On this case, it's actually a full squad, but I've seen it differ a little bit, and it's kind of the same for the Americans. So the Soviets and the Americans almost have identical counterparts for the most part. Both squads, for example, with the Motor Strelicky and the Fireteam Dragon. Now let's actually take a look at the LAW, the Law versus the Motor Strelicky. These are pretty comparable units. American infantry and Soviet infantry are pretty well matched against each other for the most part. The RPK and the M249 are slightly different, and obviously the M16 and the AK are different as well. But based on their numbers and based on their transports, individually, a one-on-one, one team may have the advantage, but the difference may be the troop transport or the cost of the unit. In this case, they're the same. So both are kind of mediocre but well-equipped to be able to fight each other. The Soviets, as you can see, have a 7 strength for their vehicle, or their platoon, and the Americans have a 5. But the faster firing rate of the M249 may increase suppression, and so thus they might be able to pin down more units before help arrives. But in this game, you're mostly not going to be taking things on one at a time. They must be used all together. Speaking of all together, then, let's take a look at tanks. Infantry is best used in conjunction with tanks. Infantry and tanks go together very nicely, and they're very good at helping to spot each other, targets for each other, and to engage those targets as well. In this case, you have another command unit here, the A1 Abrams CP. The command unit here, a tank that can both fight and also capture an area. It'll have to be stationary in order to do so, but this means the enemy will have to invest a lot of resources to find and destroy this vehicle, because once they find it, if they find it with a smaller scout unit, let's say a sniper team, the sniper team is not going to be able to destroy this, but if the sniper team is able to spot this vehicle, they can then call in an airstrike on it and destroy it. And that's the same for all tanks. For example, the T-64BV. Being in this menu is also very helpful to identify what the differences between two tanks are. So if you're wondering how would a T-64BV fare against, let's say, a American Abrams, which we'll take a look at here, you can see the differences between the two tanks and their costs. The A1 HA Abrams costs quite a bit more at 280 points versus 235 points, and these points are currency that you'll receive throughout the game on different things that you do. Typically it trickles in over time, and you'll be able to spend it then on tanks and troops. And in this case, the Abrams outclasses it slightly in terms of its frontal armor, and its side armor, rear armor, and top armor are almost identical except for the top of the T-64. But it's a gamble. The M1 Abrams doesn't have an ATGM, and the T-64 does. So as you can see under the ground target for target range of the Egona SACLOS, the Scalos, It's basically a ATGM that can be fired from the, most of the times from the main turret of Soviet tanks. And so in this case, it slightly outranges that enemy tank, so it may be able to damage it as it's approaching, as they both try to spot each other. An ATGM could be fired first and cause a lot more damage, and then the smoothbore 125 millimeter could do some good damage against the American armor. But it's all a gamble. Numbers, there's many factors here. Again, not a one-on-one battle, but you can do some direct comparisons to prepare. And so again, when you have T-64s facing off against Abrams, you should also have helicopters nearby, infantry nearby to both protect and attack from enemy forces and to attack the enemy forces, that type of thing. So pretty great modeling on all the units as well. I must say I'm quite impressed. I'm glad that they don't look pristine and clean. They look like mean battle machines, and I really do like that. Now, keep in mind there's a big difference, too, between main battle tanks and, for example, engineering tanks. This tank here is mostly for firing into, in the Top Gun reference, you can see that this large barrel here, 165 millimeters, really good for destroying ground targets nearby. This is good for going into a town and firing at infantry. Essentially, think of this thing as like a heavily armored mortar. This thing's really good at pounding infantry positions. And there's many other vehicles in the game, too, that are not tanks but are anti-tank, such as this M91 or 901A1 ITV. This thing fires an anti-tank missile at enemy tanks, and it's got a pretty good range, almost comparable to the previous Soviet tank. And in this game, the ranges may not be accurate, but they're for balancing purposes, so you may see a preset of small, medium, and long range, or short range. In this case, this engages at 2650, which is about as same as that T80, so or the T64 that we saw before. So yeah, you can see that both of these units will be able to shoot at each other at pretty much the same distance. They're both bad at stealth, but the optics on the M90 are worse, so the tank may have a better time. But that's why you would want to bring a Recon unit in order to support those tanks. So all the tanks and such look good. There's many different values and dates of production. Again, remember, a lot of things in this game will be based on what they were planning to use in 1989. So not as many things are modern. Some things are very modern, and a lot of things are out of date or old as well. There's many options for anti-tank. This is probably going to be the most complex part of the game, as well as learning all the anti-tank missiles and their values and such, as most people might be familiar with the tanks and the infantry squads versus the actual ATGMs themselves. Well, let's look on Recon then. Recon is also retrofitted to be kind of the same as tanks in terms of, like, you can have Recon tanks or Recon vehicles. In this case, we see like a BMP that's been fitted to serve as a Recon vehicle. So this would be great to be along with those BMPs or infantry as they're transporting units around, and they'll be able to spot them and use their ATGMs, or to be great with tanks. Additionally, you can use these vehicles to also engage independently without the support of other units. So this Kiowa here is fantastic at firing Hellfire missiles at the enemy, possibly on roads. With this large little Recon thing at the top, it'll be able to spot the enemy from a distance and then engage them with 4 of those Hellfire missiles, to which they're fairly accurate, about a 70% accuracy, which is damn near exceptional, really. And so thus it would be able to hit it if it's stationary. So if you happen to find an enemy command, you can pop and squat as soon as possible. You can come up over the tree lines, fire at the enemy unit, destroy it, and get out of there before the enemy even knows you're there. Good, sounds great, but it's a real tricky thing to pull off. So additionally, you have APCs. This is the M113 I had mentioned earlier. In this case, instead of being retrofitted for troop transport, it's a little bit more for engaging enemy vehicles or enemy troops from a distance with the recoilless rifle, and also being a Recon vehicle, so it can help provide that supporting fire. Likewise, vehicles are smart to use as well. This is really good to use with infantry. The Bradley is very good to use with American tanks. And helicopters are also, of course, very good to use with helicopters as well. Or maybe tanks, because, of course, this has an anti-tank capability. And so this would be good to utilize with the tanks that might also be supported by, let's say, an Apache or whatnot. There's very large helicopters for spotting. They have exceptional optics. It seems like the larger the helicopter is, the better it is. In fact, the OH-58 Scout is very good in comparison to the Mi-8K. And so bigger is not always better, although this can travel a little bit further, I believe, and has the capability to take more damage. So if you were able to fly over an area and get shot at a little bit, this has a better survivability due to its size. Speaking of getting shot at, if you want to shoot down these helicopters and aircraft, what you can do is bring in some anti-aircraft. Many different models for anti-aircraft. some that seem to be retrofitted for anti-aircraft, such as the American M113 PVADs. A lot of the American weapons are this chassis, the M113, modified to be anti-tank or anti-infantry or anti-aircraft in this case. Some are mortars. In this case, it is a gigantic 20mm Vulcan cannon mounted onto the turret of a PVADS, which does have a radar capability. And so this can actually be shot at by SEED, which is essentially an aircraft that can seek radar signals trying to detect it and fire back at it before it has a chance to detect or destroy it. Well, if you see any of those helicopters, these are great weapons to call in. There's also heat-seeking in this game, so there is a difference between infrared and radar. Infrared, of course, is a little inaccurate compared to radar, but it has the capability of continuously firing without any risk to the vehicle, at least from an aircraft that can detect it via radar. It could still be destroyed by an aircraft. That's a little ballsy move, but that seems to be the way that most anti-aircraft is destroyed in the game, is via another aircraft. There's also man-pads, or man-portable weapons. Before you saw the ATGMs and you saw the rocket launchers to destroy tanks, but the Americans and the Soviets also have man-portable anti-aircraft weapons and anti-tank weapons in two-man squads that can be placed in buildings or hiding somewhere near enemy call-out points in order to ambush them. And there's also aircraft that are anti-aircraft as well. So in this case, you have some infrared missiles from the OH-58C that can engage enemy helicopters or enemy aircraft. Sometimes aircraft, but mostly it's going to be used against enemy helicopters as they're more stationary. All sorts of different options and sizes. This damn Winnebago here is a big boy. Fires some long radar-guided missiles, but these are, of course, easily destroyed by tanks and infantry, so it's best to keep them in the back. One of the longest-range weapons here, the I think this is the Cub or Cube. I think it means cube or square in Russian. I don't know if it says the name anywhere, but I recognize it from previous games. Let's see what it's called here. I don't see the name anywhere. Anyway, oh, that should be at the bottom. But anyway, this thing is basically a gigantic rolling anti-aircraft missile battery, massive radar on top of it, and 4 missiles to fire at helicopters and aircraft. Its range is 3,500 meters or 2,000 meters for helicopters. But this thing is basically a one and done. This thing is like a sniper rifle, but it's also a glass cannon, so keep that in mind. There's also vehicles that are mixed to engage with both. We have radar-guided missiles and a 30mm cannon. So in this case, it has both missiles and cannons, and it's probably one of the more expensive. And so it's very good at destroying aircraft, much better than most, but of course, it can also be easily destroyed with SEED. Let's move on to aircraft, actually, since we've been talking about them. Lots of aircraft to consider in the game in terms of air superiority fighters, also bombers, also anti-ground. Of course, one of the more famous aircraft you may recognize here is going to be the A-10, if I can find it. There it is, A-10 Thunderbolt right there, big boy. Burt Reynolds on the front, that big old Burt. Can be turned on and off, by the way. All the weapons in this game can be turned on and off to where you can command your vehicles to utilize certain weapons over others. So if you're micromanaging an A-10 Thunderbolt, you can go ahead and turn off the Maverick missiles and the AIM-9s, so that way it only uses its 30mm Avenger autocannon, or, well, death machine on the front of it. And, of course, this means that it will only use that 30mm to engage enemy troops, vehicles, transports, and other aircraft. It can also engage aircraft and, of course, helicopters, too. So it's quite a slow machine, but very, very capable at destroying stuff and very heavily armed. Another thing to consider in this game, too, is that for especially aircraft and helicopters, as we may have shown you before, if we take a look at the Apaches, yes, if you may have been paying attention, some of these loadouts are slightly different based on what vehicle you choose. You cannot choose a helicopter with different layouts or weapons. What you do is you choose a different vehicle entirely, which means that it's the same vehicle, but the stats are the same in terms of its speed. You can see down below that the AH-64 Apache, which is loaded with the missiles here, is basically the exact same as the AH-64 that has the Hellfire. So if we take a look, one with the Hellfires and one with the missile pods are basically the same speeds, same fuel capacity. Everything is pretty much the same between those, but of course the weapons are where the difference is. And so of course you can take a look at all that and choose what you want. So you have your rockets only, your Hydra rockets and Hellfires, or Hellfires only, and yeah, so then that makes it a lot easier to be able to choose the right weapon for the situation. And, of course, the same with the Cobra with the missiles and the rocket pods, too. A lot of good stuff to consider here. And I think some of these might even be armed with... oh, well, here we go. We have M240s on the side for the door gunners, and then, of course, rockets here, too. These can be called out individually or used as transports if they get destroyed to get units out of places if you want to. So keep that in mind. And these aircraft will work kind of the same. Helicopters and aircraft kind of work the same, but these will be called out. Aircraft work much differently in this game. Their call out is much slower, so that way if you see a target of opportunity on the field, you might need to have a aircraft constantly called out on the map to where it may be circling in the back, and then you ask it to come forward in order to destroy a target, that type of thing. And the same with air superiority fighters such as the MiG-31, with its very, very long-range missiles at 3,535. Might be increased, actually, in the future. But a very high rate of fire and the ability to launch missiles a very long distance. It's quite powerful indeed. ATGMs for the Soviets. The Su-25 is their answer to the A-10, with the same loadouts with the anti-tank guided missiles and also the rockets and napalm bombs, too, that can destroy or cut off enemy supply routes. This is a very good weapon to use, by the way, to block bridges and to block roadways and to destroy vehicles, or rather their approach avenues. If you drop a bunch of napalms on where you bombs where you expect the enemy to approach, then you'll be able to divert their forces and or delay them or get their troops to panic to either pull out and change the enemy's plans as that napalm is still burning. Both sides have access to napalm. Very effective in battle, for sure. There's also some other kind of smaller fighters that are not necessarily air superiority, but there's a few that are kind of meant for more dogfighting, such as the Phantom II. The Sparrow's a little bit longer range, but the AIM-9Js and the Vulcan 20mm really good at destroying enemy vehicles or aircraft at closer range. But the 20mm can also attack ground, so keep in mind that if you call out an anti-aircraft that it still has the ability to attack targets on the ground with its cannon. Any sort of cannon can destroy ground targets too, so if on the way out from destroying an aircraft, your anti-aircraft vehicle also spots another tank that it can shoot at, you may as well do that. And who knows, could change the tide of battle. A lot of options to consider here, so definitely take a look at all the different types of infrared and get yourself familiar with what the vehicles carry, and that'll be their capabilities based on mostly what they're carrying for their weapons. Their speeds and such may differ. Their agility, for example, is, in this case, the worst, but it might be a good vehicle to call out because it's only 195 points versus one that might be, let's say, the MiG-24 that's 215, for example. It depends on the situation, what you need to do. But if you absolutely positively need to bomb stuff, that'd be the one for you. And a great way to destroy enemy hiding spots inside of buildings. All right, well, speaking of destroying, there's nothing that destroys quite like artillery. And artillery in this game is plentiful. And by that I mean there's a few options for each of the artillery pieces that you have. In this case, the MLRS and the MLRS cluster. And so that means you can have basically flying bombs that shoot flying bombs, essentially. The M270 MLRS is a multiple launch rocket system, which means that it can fire a bunch of different missiles. In this case, you have your cluster missiles versus your high explosive. So you can kind of see that one has a penetration value, which means it's mostly for tanks, as for the other ones for light vehicles and infantry. A big explosion might not hurt a tank as much as a cluster munition might, and that's the way to kind of try to balance out the artillery a little bit so it's not as annoying. Speaking of artillery, that's not just the rocket types. There's also traditional artillery in the sense of a self-propelled gun. These guns are fantastic, and with the help of Recon, artillery can be made a lot more accurate. So if you have a unit that's been told to hold fire, and you have, let's say, a group of Army Rangers that are closing in on a position, and they're a recon team, or you just spotted them with regular infantry, if you keep your infantry close and you keep them quiet, or if you have a recon helicopter or a vehicle nearby, this can zero in and destroy targets that are stationary like no other. It's incredible. These are very valuable units, and they're incredibly powerful and need to be protected. But keep in mind that when you fire, you're basically putting a giant arrow to where the vehicle is with the tracer smoke that flies up from the vehicle. And, of course, everybody can kind of triangulate where you're firing from, so remember to fire and move. Great to use command groups on these. Mortars are also very important. As I said before, Even this vehicle has been retrofitted to be a mortar unit, and in this case it can fire close by. I believe it can use smoke rounds, and so that's something that you could utilize to block your approach to a village or a town, and so you can use smoke to block your troops' advance, then start firing HE rounds where the enemy is, and give your troops a very good chance to take over the positions. There's multiple units to consider too. Different firing rates and different types of mortars that they use. One's a 81 millimeter, one's a 107, so just be advised of that. And this will also help you if we make units that are combined arms. Now, it's unlikely in this game because they're using traditional divisions that a German unit would be within a American unit, but it is likely that American vehicles and specific things will be used by other factions too. So it's just another thing to keep in mind that some of these vehicles may have the same capabilities in other armies that you fight with, but the costs and such may be different based on the division. We also have a rocket system here for the Russians, or for the Soviets, the BM-21 Grad, and there's also some smaller artillery for them as well, which is quite mean-looking and can provide a lot of damage. Penetration here. The weapon can fire as a tank gun too, so if it happens to be ambushed by a bunch of transports, it can definitely fight back against the enemy. All right, we've covered logistics. We've covered infantry, artillery, tanks, recon, anti-aircraft, helicopters, and air. But we've not covered on how to make a battle group yet. I've made a couple of battle groups for myself, for the Soviets, and for, well, let's just say the Warsaw Pact and the NATO forces. And so I will show you how to do some more of that in the future. This is just a rough, brief overview of everything that there is to see in the game, but keep in mind that mods are also coming to the game soon too, so there might be a lot more vehicles than just those prior to 1989 or slightly past, again, based on balancing purposes for range and things like that. A lot to learn. There's a lot to unpack here and a lot of information that I hope a lot of you found to be useful. And please do use the comments section down below as a teaching tool for everyone else, including myself, for a lot of things that we weren't able to cover here in today's half-hour episode. And we'll go into more detail on how to make a deck and how to fight it out in solo and to do some testing in the future. But keep that in mind. That is how the deck system works. We'll put our theories to practice very soon. Thanks again for subscribing. Smash that like button, and I'll see you all next time. Enjoy Warno. It is out, of course, on January 20th, 2022, and it will be in early access from there on out until more and more features are added. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.